This is a session on literary consciousness studies, and our first speaker is Ankhi Mukherjee, who's here at Oxford, at Wadham, I think. She's a professor of English and World Literatures here. Her most recent book, Unseen City: The Psychic Lives of the Urban Poor, has won Columbia University's Robert S. Liebert Award for Outstanding Scholarship in the field of applied psychoanalysis. Her second monograph, What is a Classic? Post-Colonial Rewriting and Invention of the Canon, was awarded the British Academy Prize in English Literature. Her other publications include Aesthetic Hysteria, The Great Neurosis in Victorian Melodrama and Contemporary Fiction, and collections of essays she's edited, namely A Concise Companion to Psychoanalysis, Literature and Culture, and After the Canon. She has published in competitive peer-reviewed journals, including PLMA, MLQ, Contemporary Literature, Parallax, and the Cambridge Journal of Postcolonial Literary Inquiry, and sits on the editorial boards of several international journals. She's been a postdoctoral research fellow at the British Academy, a visiting fellow at the Humanities Research Centre at ANU, and the John Hinckley Professor at Johns Hopkins. She'll be faculty at Harvard University's Institute of World Literature in summer of this year. At present, she has 2 books under contract. She's writing a very short introduction to post-colonial literature for OUP, and co-editing a collaborative volume titled Decolonizing the English Literary Curriculum. So, thank you.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you to the organizers of this wonderful conference. You know, I've learned so much. I feel like a student again. And also thank you to Meda, who has put together, who's choreographed this so imaginatively, and it's just been so much fun. Thank you. So I just want to start by saying that the work I'm presenting is very, very new. I actually wrote the paper for this conference, and I hope, you know, the exhilaration of new ideas comes across, and not so much, you know, the fact that I haven't really spent that much time working on this material, which will go into my 4th book. Okay, let me start. I think I've used this mic. The starting point of this paper is a book titled Tribute to Freud, written in London during the Second World War. The author is the American poet Hilda Doolittle, H.D., and the book has 2 sections: Writing on the Wall, which was published in Life and Letters Today in 1945-1946, and also Advent. You know, H.D. says in the author's note that the second part, which is called Advent, is both a continuation of and a prelude to writing on the wall. And this kind of causality is something you'll find constantly in H.D.'s writing. Drawing on the notebooks of 1933, which H.D. kept during her analysis with Sigmund Freud, this book wasn't assembled until 1948 in Lausanne. The book is literature, cultural genealogy, aesthetic history, and autobiography rolled into one. H.D. had agreed to seeking treatment from Freud in 1933 to overcome a severe writer's block and to also study psychoanalysis. Freud was 77 years old, selective in taking on analyzans, and H.D. was grateful to be one of the chosen few. She saw Freud 5 days a week for 3 or 4 months. However, her great admiration for Freud was not without ambivalence, resistance, and agon. She struggled with Freud's authoritarianism and his atheism. She questioned the ethics of psychoanalysis and its intellectual possession. And I've chosen this image carefully. This is Freud in one of the last days of his spending his time in Bagasa 19, which was his Vienna office, and it shows his Chow Yofi, who features in H.D.'s tribute to Freud. So some of the things she says about Freud: my intuition sometimes functioned by the split second the quicker. The professor was not always right. Or if Freud's pronouncements had the ability to break something in a person, H.D. would provide the resistance to ensure something would not, must not be broken. Again, in another part of the tribute, she says, Freud had struck oil in his explorations of the psyche, but, I'm quoting H.D. again, the application of the oil, what could or should be made of it, could not be regulated or supervised by its original promoter. Now, H.D. apprehends the unconscious in this book through what she calls the hieroglyph of the unconscious, a realm of fantasy and imagination crimped in the shapes, lines, and graphs of dreams. So let's look at this quotation and let it linger, because I will come back to different parts of it. These are all the shapes, lines, graphs, the hieroglyph of the unconscious. And the professor had burst open the field to the study of this vast, unexplored region. He himself, at least to me personally, deplored the tendency to fix ideas too firmly, to set symbols, or to weld them inexorably. Yes, a vast field of exploration, and alas, exploitation lay open. There were the immemorial gods ranged in their semicircle on the professor's table, and you can see that as in the image here. Freud's gods, or Diana Fuss calls them dolls, ranged in their semicircle on the professor's table, that stood, as I have said, like the high altar in the Holy of Holies. There were those gods, each the carved symbol of an idea or a deathless dream that some people read goods. In the paragraph that appears, I'll come back to different parts of this quote and explain. In the paragraph above this quote, H.D. is talking about daily newspapers. She's talking about cheap newsprint, good print, bad print, smudged and uneven print, and how these smudges and daily residues seep into her dreams. As Laura Marcus has pointed out, she's echoing Freud's repeated references to popular newspapers in the interpretation of dreams, and also debates in the 1920s about the visible lettering of film captions and intertitles, their indeterminate nature as speech or writing, as Marcus puts it. The hieroglyphic is relatable to the label H.D. imagist Ezra Pound had attached to the poet, ushering a critical vocabulary that focused on the concrete, the actual, the newsprint, the hard. H.D.'s hieroglyph, however, refers not just to the grimy alphabet of modernism, but also to ancient Egyptian ideograms. She had visited Egypt in 1923, and that's the picture with her partner Briar, at the time of the Tutankhamun excavation, and she had seen the ruins of the temple at Karnak. In her Helen in Egypt, a lengthy sequence of lyric poems comprised of 3-line choral stanzas, Helen takes refuge in the temple of Amen, and this is the Greek equivalent of Amen is Zeus, Helen's progenitor. Here she sees the hieroglyphs of the temple. She cannot crack the code, yet she imbibes the meaning of the pictorial writing. In a prefatory note, H.D. claims that Helen herself denies intellectual knowledge of the temple symbols, but she is nearer to them than the instructed scribe. For her, the secret of stone writing is repeated in natural or human symbols. She herself is the writing. It's a relevant detail that for writing a sequence such as Helen in Egypt, H.D. worked less with the original Greek of the Euripidean text, so the original is Euripides' Helen, and more with bilingual translations in French. So it's a reading that she's promulgating, which is not a literal deciphering, but a gathering of sense from translated letters and symbols. And I'm connecting her translational ethics to what she's doing with the hieroglyph of the unconscious, a relay of meaning which is associative as well as logical, connecting mythological personae in canonical works to intensely personal phenomena. Helen, Hellenism, Hilda, H.D., whose mother's name happens to be Helen. Helen is the text and Helen the reader. If we move away momentarily from the shapes, lines, and graphs of hieroglyphs, what does the word unconscious mean to H.D.? She seems to use the term interchangeably with vision, memory, dream pictures, and works of art. Her analysis with Freud helps her differentiate between ephemeral and confused visions and what she calls real visions. Those memories, visions, dreams, reveries, those memories, visions, dreams, reveries, or what you will, are different. So she's differentiating between the ephemeral visions and the real ones. Those memories, visions, dreams, reveries are different. Their texture is different, and the effect they have on mind and body is different. Her interpretation of these phenomena varied frequently from Freud's. He said, this is H.D. writing in tribute, he said a dream sometimes showed a corner, but I argued that this dream was a finality, an absolute, or a synthesis. So I want to discuss H.D.'s dreams in some detail, and in particular, the dream of the princess, a dream about the pharaoh's daughter finding Moses in the bulrushes. It's a dream which she had in Vienna in 1933. She was a dark woman wearing a yellow robe wrapped around her like a sari, H.D. writes, but she's not Indian, she's Egyptian. She appears at the top of a marble staircase which descends into a river. There is no detail here, historical or symbolic. She has no visible indicators of rank, but we know this is a princess. I'm quoting H.D. here. She's as abstract a lady could be, yet she's a real entity, a real person. The dreamer is at the foot of the stairs, unaware of who they are and how they got there. There is no before and after. It's a perfect moment in time or out of time. The dreamer's attention is drawn to a reed ark floating in the river, with the baby nesting in it who will eventually be rescued by the princess. H.D. identifies this image as one she has seen in the Pharaoh's daughter, seen of the Pharaoh's daughter in the illustrated Dore Bible, an image titled Moses in the bulrushes. But this is a belated recognition. It's not a dream relic or a memory that has come unbidden in waking hours. Moreover, that was a black and white print, not comparable with the vividness of the present manifestation. Freud asks H.D. if it is she, the dreamer, who is the baby in the basket, or is she the child Miriam, half hidden in the rushes? Do I wish myself to be the founder of a new religion? H.D. ponders. She was the sixth child in her large family, the only daughter to survive. Why was it always a girl who had died? She remembers asking her parents. I mean, if you're asking what is the unconscious in H.D.'s dreams, we might as well ask what a dream is in this reckoning. Are they symbols of ideas like the gods or goods in Freud's office? And this is a joke. So when Freud had moved from Vienna to London, H.D. had sent a cluster of gardenias to Freud with an unsigned card that read, "To greet the return of the gods." And Freud had read that scribble as goods. They were both referring to the artifacts that had been transported. So the gods or the dolls that you see in this picture and the one before, they're referring to the artifacts that had been transported from Vienna to London through the good offices of Mary Bonaparte. Although God's goods could stand for Freud himself, arriving intact after a perilous journey. The dreams are real, H.D. asserts, as real as any of the bronze or marble or pottery or clay objects that fill the cases around the walls, that are set in elegant precision in a wide arc on the professor's table. The dream of the princess, the river, the child, H.D. states, has been brought on by her contact with the professor. The Egypt of her visit to the temple of Karnak has collided with the dimly outlined Ra, Nut, and Ka figures on Freud's desk. The princess is a mother symbol, they both agree, Freud and H.D. Is she a stand-in for Freud's French translator, Marie Bonaparte, fondly called our princess by the professor? Freud's difficult German had not only been born across a language barrier by Bonaparte, but she was actually a princess. She was also instrumental in securing the Freud family's escape to and exile in London. Does the dream indicate that Freud would be born again with the aid of another translator? H.D. this time? H.D. varies from and disagrees with Freud's dream interpretations, but it is imperative for her to discuss the experiences with the professor. There was no use telling the story into the air, as it were, repeatedly, like the ancient mariner who plucked at the garments of the wedding guest with that skinny hand. And there are many, many literary references that dot, as H.D.'s memoir. I want to bring in another vision before we return to the meaning of the dream of the princess. Freud was disturbed by this one and called it a dangerous tendency or symptom. This vision belongs to the category of dreams that H.D. calls pictures. A similar dynamic of revelation and withholding is at play here. The dream content, an elaborate buildup of past memories, and also the shadow on them, the shadow that she calls the writing on the wall. It's trying to change the... Okay. These pictures are so clear. They're like transparencies set before candles in a dark room. I may or may not have mentioned these incidents to the professor, but they were there. Upon the elaborate buildup of past memories across the intricate network made by hairlines that divided one irregular bit of the picture puzzle from another, there fell inevitably a shadow, a writing on the wall, a curve like a reversed, unfinished S and a dot beneath it, a question mark, the shadow of a question. Is this it? So the image I've sort of like somewhat perversely chosen for this one is the German expressionist film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which came out in 1920, which influenced Virginia Woolf's essay Cinema. And in this essay, she argued that film was both a modern medium and an archaic one. And so cinema would represent reality as well, with the same facility as it represented the world of dreams. And this is a film that is, the writing of the wall would have been very well known to anyone writing in this period. And there are all sorts of sort of material objects that kind of, punctuate the linguistic structures of H.D.'s memoir. So for instance, when she talks about the unfinished S and a dot beneath it, and then she reverses it, she had talked in a bit of the memoir about a figurine of Vishnu that Freud received from one of his Indian disciples. And she had pondered about the serpent on top of the Vishnu and whether it was an inverted question mark. Anyway, the shadow of the question mark. So what I'm trying to say is that the dreams are not really dreams. The dreams are sort of terribly implicated with the non-dream. A reversed, unfinished S with the dot beneath it threatens to nullify the most expedient explanations of these remembered visions. And then you have, in the second quote, you have the famous writing on the wall vision, which happened to H.D. in the Greek Ionian island of Corfu in 1920. The series of shadow or light pictures I saw projected on the wall of a hotel bedroom in the Ionian island of Corfu at the end of April 1920, I considered this sort of dream or projected picture or vision as a sort of halfway state between ordinary dream and the vision of those who, for lack of a more definite term, we must call psychics or clairvoyants. This vision, H.D. states, is of the same quality and intensity as that of the dream of the princess. She calls them both super memories, normal memories that have been retained with such detail and vibrancy that they have become events out of time. Freud interprets the picture writing on the wall as a desire for union with the mother. I mean, keep in mind that, Tribute to Freud is not a case study written by Freud. So we are really getting what Freud said through what H.D. chooses to tell us. And Freud interprets this as a desire for the union with the mother. H.D. tries to analyze this. So instead of Freud putting her under the microscope, she's actually, she's returning the favor to Freud. So she was physically in Greece, in Hellas, Helen. She had come home to Greece. Or was it a flight from quotidian reality into the fantasy of Greece? The picture on the wall, H.D. says, is a vision that she has never seen before or since. And so what did it comprise of? I'll just quote some of the lines without trying to get into this. I don't have the time for that. I saw a dim shape forming on the wall between the foot of the bed and the washstand. She first thinks it's sunlight flickering from the branches of the flowering orange trees outside the window, before she realizes that that side of the house is already in shadow. The pictures on the walls, she says, were like colorless transfers or calcomanias, as we called them as children. The shadows are actually not made of darkness, but of light. The writing on the wall is dim light on shadow, not shadow on light. The first picture is that of a three-quarter face, head and shoulders, no marked features. It's a familiar face, but it could be anyone. The second picture is the outline of a goblet or cup. The third picture is not flat like the first two, and this is a very important picture in the analysis. It is a circle or two circles, the base the larger of the two. The two circles are joined by three lines, which are not flat, but in perspective. The three lines remind H.D. of a tripod of the classic Delphi, and also a small stand for a spirit lamp she carried in her travels. So this is an image which collapses a venerated object of the cult of the sun god into the humble metal frame often used to support a small saucepan for boiling water. She also sees a ladder. She sees a sun disk. So again, the Egyptian ideograms, a sun disk with a winged goddess being drawn into it. H.D. makes religious connections with the images. The goblet is the mystic chalice. The ladder is Jacob's ladder. The spirit lamp, the tripod of the priestess or pythoness of Delphi. For Freud, however, the visions are dangerous symptoms of megalomania. And as I said, an infantile wish to be reunited with the mother. H.D. tells her partner, her lover, and her friend Briar that there have been pictures here. I thought they were shadows at first, but they are light, not shadow. While the pictures have emerged out of nowhere, the witnessing of them is a conscious act, capable of being suspended at will. H.D. describes it as a sustained crystal gazing stare. Shall I stop? Shall I go on? She asks Briar, who says without hesitation, go on. The witnessing is therefore also a collective act, for without Briar, H.D. admits, I could not have gone on. Briar, whose real name was Annie Winifred Ellerman, had taken H.D. to the islands to help her recover from the pregnancy and the illness, Spanish flu, she suffered during and after the birth of her daughter Perdita. It was she really, H.D. writes, who had the detachment and integrity of the Pythoness of Delphi. But it was I, battered and dissociated from my American family and my English friends, who were seeing the pictures. Or perhaps in some sense, we were seeing it together. The lead up to the occult phenomena of the writing of the wall in 1920 was grim. H.D. had had a series of shocks before March 1920, which she described as a spring of unresolved terrors, perils, heartaches, dangers. The death of her father in 1919, quite possibly related to the death in action of her brother in France, her own near death in the influenza winter of 1919 when she was waiting for her second child, having lost the first in 1915. War neurosis, which she called her personal war phobia, is pervasive in her writing in this period, with H.D. believing that the stillbirth of her child in 1915 was brought on by the news of the Lusitania's sinking by German forces. So the British ocean liner was returning to Liverpool from New York. The writing on the wall appears at the end of this period and the start of one of regeneration. H.D. treats these unconscious visions as oracles, the wellspring of her inspiration to be a poet. As a fellow poet, Denise Levertov said of H.D.'s art, it is indeed a poetry not of direct statement, but of direct evocation, a poetry of hieroglyphics, of embodiment, incarnation. The writing on the wall is a form of writing. It's not just a form of viewing. The moving finger writes, H.D. states, albeit without claiming agency or authorship. The personages of myth in the vision are also creatures of imagination. H.D. evokes the idea of a fourth dimension, a fourth wall, which is space, not time. The fourth wall in Freud's office in Bagasa 19 is a largely unwalled connecting room, a room beyond which may appear very dark, or there may be broken light and shadow. So we have to consider the fact that the writing on the wall is also a projection on this wall, this not wall, as H.D. lies on the couch, translating the pictographic to the verbal for Freud, who is sitting behind her across the room. The element of bilingual translation brings us back to H.D.'s dream of the princess, which she had associated with Mary Bonaparte. The dream of the priestess of Pythoness of Delphi, seated on the tripod, where she pronounced her utterances in verse couplets, and the princess who would be instrumental in founding a new religion. There has been writing on walls before, H.D. reminds us in the tribute, in biblical, in classic literature. These are warnings and messages from other dimensions or states of beings. The writing on the wall in her Corfu vision she enjoins should be seen as not just these sort of premonitions, but as an extension of the artist's consciousness. She wants us to read them as an illustrated poem. It is taken from an actual dream or daydream and projected on walls. H.D. says it's a freak thought, the writing on the wall, a reflection of a reflection. In the last section of my presentation, I want to turn to H.D.'s Notes on Thoughts and Vision, which is very late, published in well after she died in the 1980s, but it was written in 1919, so just around the time when she is undergoing that sort of breakdown and miscarriage, etc. So it's written long before entering into dialogue with Freud, and where she conceptualizes writing as an embodied visionary process. So the next slide. So this is from Notes on Thoughts and Vision. It's a prose work, but very sort of staccato, very impressionistic. 3 states or manifestations of life: body, mind, overmind. Aim of men and women of highest development is equilibrium, balance, growth of the 3 at once. Brain without physical strength is a manifestation of weakness. Body without reasonable amount of intellect is an empty fibrous bundle of glands. Overmind without the balance of the other 2 is madness, and a person so developed would have as much respect as a reasonable maniac and no more. We have no idea why she's making these pronouncements, at what angle she comes in on this sort of, the metapsychology. While the 3 states of body, mind, and overmind seem as important as each other at first, as the book progresses, it is clear that the overmind, a field of consciousness which is anchored in the body, is the most significant for H.D. the artist. H.D. visualizes the overmind as a cap of consciousness over her head. If I could visualize or describe that overmind in my own case, I should say this. It seems to me, that's the sort of 3rd quote on the handout, on the slide. It seems to me that a cap is over my head, a cap of consciousness over my head, my forehead, affecting a little my eyes. And then she goes on to say, the overmind seems a cap like water, transparent, fluid, yet with definite body, contained in a definite space. It is like a closed sea plant, jellyfish, or anemone. The overmind mediates the gap between spirit and flesh, reason and passion. It is fluid and mobile, yet with definite body. It mediates a set of super feelings, commuting sensory impressions on the body to expressions of the mind. I'm going to read on a little more about the overmind in what Kathleen Crown has called H.D.'s Jellyfish Manifesto. But just a word about the images. These are the images of the scientific artist, and Nick's talk yesterday kind of was a very good pace setter for this one. So these are the images of the scientific artist Ernst Haeckel's. These are his images. These are his paintings of jellyfish and Siphonophore. I think they were in water, unfolding their arms and tentacles. And these are he's drawing these from the specimens that were collected by HMS Challenger in 1883. Sorry, I don't know what's happening with this. Okay. So I'm going to continue to read a little bit more of the Jellyfish Manifesto. I should say, to continue this jellyfish metaphor, that long feelers reached down and through the body, that these stood in the same relation to the nervous system as the overmind to the brain or intellect. There is then a set of super feelings. These feelings extend out and about us, as the long floating tentacles of jellyfish reach out and about him. They are not of different material, extraneous as the physical arms and legs are extraneous to the gray matter of the directing brain. The superfeelers are part of the supermind as the jellyfish feelers are the jellyfish itself, elongated in fine threads. I first realized this state of consciousness in my head. I visualize it just as well now, centered in the love region of the body, or placed like a fetus in the body. The clairvoyance, the very center of consciousness, is tied to the womb. The jellyfish visitation on Scilly Islands enables H.D. to blur her vision and let the mind drift to an abnormal psychic state. From this cap-like unconscious, the overmind, superfeelers climb down the body and reach outwards like tentacles. Critics have argued that the jellyfish image is a rebuttal to Wyndham Lewis, the male protagonist of whose modernist novel Tar wants to be rid of jellyfish attributes, the repulsive fleshliness of women's bodies. That may be the case, but it's very important to note that instead of restricting the overmind to women, H.D. is offering the female body as a source of creativity, and the body itself as a zone of perfectibility and transcendence. And in the process, she also lets the womb wander away from its dull reproductive labor. The transparent and opaque jellyfish provide a visual connection between the expatriate with her light pictures in Corfu to a native sea creature inhabiting a marine environment symbiotically. Years later, in tribute to Freud, H.D. would term the Scilly Isles jellyfish experience subaqueous. She is now lying on the psychoanalytical couch, and however excursive her fantasies, she says she knows that she has to abide by, and I'm quoting H.D., a center, a security, and an aim. Perhaps consciousness is this condition of being salvaged and saved. Shipwrecked like the mariner, I have sensed bell notes from the hermit's chapel, H.D. writes. But she also forces us to consider the possibility that consciousness is also being a shipwreck, not just salvaged and saved. A psychic coral polyp, she calls it, attaching itself to large biocomposite structures. In tribute to Freud, H.D. is a poet at the height of her powers, not merely a patient or a student, that's the term Freud used for his late patients. She seems to contrast her current sovereign state to collective, replicative forms of being and seeing, only to collapse this distinction. Ontogeny and phylogeny really do collapse in this moment. She asks, on the couch again, did I die to blend with this entire myriad-minded coral chaplet or entire coral island? Did I put out a feeler? Thank you very much.